happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. Five score years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. This nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, tears of thee." Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. Not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring. And when this happens, when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, how are you? Welcome to the show. Happy MLK
and help
Day.
welcome our honored, distinguished guests.
There we go. Hi. I just thought that'd be a good way to start off the show this morning. It's hard not to get teary-eyed. It really is. It's yes, sorry, my cheeks are shiny. I'm freshly shorn. It's interesting how much of that speech, and that was an AI de-oldification version of it, where they took the best footage and colorized it and did some vocal tweaking to make it clearer and that kind of stuff. And it's just fascinating to see it play. A couple of thoughts went through my mind. Like, you have these divergent thoughts. You have these, kind of like thoughts you have in church or in your moments of clear meditation, where you're trying to find your moral and ethical center, and you're going, okay, who am I trying to be right now? Who am I focusing on being? And then your brain shoots off and has those kind of like side roads of like, but those sons of bitch, where your brain just kind of goes, yeah, but there's also, watch out, because you're also not great, and they're not great, and maybe they don't deserve great, and you're also maybe don't deserve it. Like, all those thoughts people have, right? They go off in this direction. And in all honesty, the biggest thought I think I could have, that I had when I watched that, was in relation to that last rally we just watched on Saturday, where Trump is standing in a field in Florence, Arizona, because he can't get a venue closer to town because he stiffed all of them and they won't take his checks. And so he's doing a fairground. And there's a few thousand people there at this gathering. And he's like, people have told me they've never seen crowds like this. And I'm like, really? Because first of all, they've seen paying crowds like this for all kinds of concerts and stuff. So free gatherings in the woods. But like the idea that people haven't seen movements like this. And the other thing that reminds me of when he says stuff like that immediately is the crowd in Chicago when Obama got elected, and you're like, oh my God, just the emotion and the size of the crowd and the positivity and all that stuff. Thanks, Braypon. By the way, hi, chat room. Good to see you. Howdy. Good morning. Happy MLK Day. And I think if this day has value for me, in the way that it has value for me, because of course it does, but if there's a specific place where it has value for me, is that it is in many ways a tuning fork for the true note of civility and understanding and the, what MLK was preaching, which is effectively the Christian concept of forgiveness. Because you have to understand from his point of view as a Christian minister, this is a big part of it. Oh, thank you, Stacy. Yes, Betty White's birthday is today. Would have been today. Is today. What a beautiful day to have her on as well. That like have her floating around in the ethers around us. But that idea that when we talk about the sons of slaveholders and the sons of slaves being friends and growing together, we have decades of distance from that, generations, great grandchildren of that. He's talking about the actual people, the children of. Now, they were pretty old at that point, but they had raised their children the same way that their parents had raised them. And so you were only entering into the sort of moment of where the grandchildren of slaveholders who were still chafing over the Civil War were grinding on this stuff. And the federal government was having to force those states years later to allow integrated schools. Then, in the present, that was his reality at the time. And when you grow up in the decades after his life and death, there is, for everyone, whether you think there is or not, there is the padding of history. There is and I am not preaching CRT, McJet. That's a different thing. CRT would be the Malcolm X wing. As a matter of fact, that's a whole other discussion for another day, but it don't get mucked up in the terms of stuff like that. What I'm saying is that he was closer to this circumstance. They were right in it as far as the civil rights struggle, and only a couple of generations away from actual slavery. And the fact that he would stand there in front of all those people, a huge gathering of black people in the country, huge gathering of white allies with them, and other allies as well. I mean, just a huge gathering of human beings there, all mixed together, and say to them that these people who are only 2 generations away from the ownership of another human being, and these people who are only 2 generations away from being owned, could sit at a table and share a meal. That was his goal, and he could see it. And a lot of times when the conversation comes up about this, about how far we have come and how far we still have to go, the focus tends to be on the people who are riding the brake, who are trying to stop it, who always have. The people who still refer to the Civil War as the War of Northern Aggression and crap like that, or have the South shall rise again shit on their truck. They, in a lot of ways, it hijacked the conversation. And to me, this is my own take on it, to me, to honor him is to honor that dream, as difficult and hard as it is. Because if we respect that striving, if we respect that speech, that belief, that idea, that quote that everybody slathers on everything, if you actually respect it, if you actually love him and what he stood for and the ideals of those things, then he was all about the difficult work of forgiveness, acceptance, and moving forward. in a time, quite frankly, where, you know, it was still a fresh wound for a lot of those folks on both sides of a war. And his idea that you could look forward to a day when the folks that were direct descendants of them. And by the way, to our new, semi-new, and partially new immigrants that have moved to this country from countries all over the world, post-Civil War, post Voting Rights Act, post Civil Rights Act, that came to this country and became citizens. To you guys, this is not your burden, but it's your struggle as well. Because many of you come from racially homogenized countries to a place that is the greatest experiment in the bonding of peoples over a unified culture of freedom for all men. This, all men are created equal. That concept is the thing that made this place unique. And to all the immigrants who've come here seeking that, when this conversation comes up, do not feel burdened by the scars of the people who lived here beforehand. But your contribution is welcome. Your contribution to this ideal that all men and women are created equal, that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a thing that should be available as a birthright to all Americans. And by example, not by, at the barrel of a gun or the enforcement of a concept, by example, the United States should be that shining beacon on a hill that they all speak of, even on the, on the right side over the years. Right? That is what the example is. For me, there's a lot about the grinding of this conversation that I think betrays the original message, that we get lost in. And it's easy to get baited into a battle of who has greater hate and who has more righteous indignation, because you will never run out of reasons to think that your opposition is awful. And lest we racially fall into some sort of Americanized version of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is sort of the example these days of an intractable difference. We need to recognize that the hard work is in those moments of forgiveness. And what happens, I think, a lot of times is that when we talk about forgiveness and we talk about mutual respect and common ground and those kind of things, where the mind immediately goes is to the polar opposite. The person that represents the worst of that idea. And our human brains that have been, trained by millennia of difficulty and hardship and pain and suffering and disease and death and monsters in the bushes, is going to look for that, is going to seek but this thing, if it is allowed to get through, will wipe us out. And that's not a bad reflex when it's genuine, when it's reacting to a circumstance in an uncivilized world. When you're lost in the woods, that's a really good antenna to have go up. But when you're talking about cleaning up after the mess of reality of past incivilities decades and centuries ago, the reality is that you are not going to run into, in general, people who are entrenched in the way that Strom Thurmond's grandfather would think. You'll stagger upon a person like that, but you'll stagger upon them the same way you would encounter, a furry or some sort of rando, no offense to furries, but this, like, the random outer reaches of human expression that survive but are not crucial for how you guide your day to day. You're not going to change your plans based on the minor interactions you might have with the worst of humanity most of the time. And I've said this many times when we talk about people who say, I don't trust other people, the American people are stupid, or people of the world are stupid, or humans are stupid, or I don't trust governments, and I don't trust this and whatever. And yet, wherever I'm speaking to that person, they clearly drove there themselves, or were even more so driven by someone else who they either know and have come to trust in spite of that person's flaws, or a pilot or a bus driver they never even exchanged words with, but they got in this vehicle and sat there reading a book or watching a movie while a total stranger flew them through the sky or across road through multiple intersections, trusting thousands of humans along the way. And if they drove themselves across a double yellow line, which we all agree you shouldn't cross, but wouldn't stop a car from crossing it mechanically, nothing materially stops a car from crossing that, except for this agreement that we all have. And so that agreement is possible, that double yellow line of conflicting ideas. We can agree on a certain level of hurt is mutual and should never be engaged in the majority of human interactions. And because that human interaction is integral to life and is your genuine experience, there has to be, I think, and I participate in this on a daily basis because of the stuff I show on my network. And you'll see that I very seldomly get genuinely angry about certain things. I'll get miffed about certain points. But most humans, with rare exception, and an ultra rare exception, do not have the ability to take away my love or belief in my fellow man. They don't have that power, nor will I ever give it to them. And so on a day like today, that speech, the full speech, not just the quote people make a meme out of, but the full speech, what it reminds me of is that it is steeped in the difficult work of forgiveness, not against the person who you would stand there and that would, pull a gun and end you in that moment, but the true interactions that you have every day with somebody who might edge that way or be brought up in that way, that you might be able to stand and show in that moment of your own recognition of your own flaws, and that your belief in the equality of every human being is that every human being has the capacity for awful. And the fact that the majority of them don't is not only a miracle statistically, but it's indicative of the reality of people more so than anybody who would try to talk you out of befriending, forgiving, or caring for someone that's not 100% in your tribe. And me saying this today with the padding of history that we all have from those days, without, any illusions that there's still a lot of work left to be done, also must be about respecting the quality and depth of what he said on those steps to those people at that time. And pretending that we live in that time or even the time before that, to me, is insulting to the work that was done to get him to those steps and the work that was done since he has been on those steps by all people that care. Standing on the shoulders of giants and recognizing the work that people have done is way more important than flippantly regarding our modern situation as equal to the struggle and the circumstance of that time. And insisting that we are, in 1964 or before that, not only denigrates and dismisses the hard work of the people who made those changes possible, but it also aims our work in the wrong direction. If you have a sinking ship that has a fire in the engine, and you patch the holes in the hull, and it's time to move on to the fire in the engine, and people are still saying, no, ignore the fire in the engine, we have to keep patching the hull. Why? Because we've always been patching the hull. That's madness, and will leave you in just as dangerous a situation through your own ignorance and your own lack of recognition of the progress that you have made. So, on my live stream, and we will, this afternoon, CSL, I want to look at Lindell's speech. I haven't looked at it yet, but Lindell's speech before Trump's rally and some of these other things. You will notice that as miffed as I will get about some of the points that they will make, and as awful as many of these folks are, there are always two things on my mind when I am making fun of the right-wing stuff and how I choose to do so, is that I will always side in the world of the silliness of it all, because I believe that righteous indignation and anger, while warranted in a lot of places, if overused, empowers your opponent, your enemy, and the person who means to do you ill. You inflate them by taking them more seriously than they deserve. By saying that they are an example of an entire group of people, or all groups of people, or one side of people, or whatever, you participate in grouping people you might be able to reach with your compassion, your sympathy, your empathy, your belief, your heart, your hope. You group them in with these awful people and herd them together. And I won't participate in that. I'm going to break off as many of the hopefuls as I possibly can. And one of the ways you do that is by anybody who puts up these flagpole people like Steve Bannon or Roger Stone or Donald Trump or Mike Lindell. I'm going to make fun of those flags so that people walk away from them. Because reconciliation, growth, progress, all those things are born out of what happens inside a person, not what you put inside a person. I can't, nor can you, have ever, no matter how much you yelled and clamored and screamed, turned a slaveholder into an abolitionist in the 1800s. They did it themselves. The ones that turned, joined the North, served as spies for the North in the bloody war that separated this country were the abolitionists and the people who thought that from the very beginning that slavery was an abomination, and joined with the British and ultimately the French to stop the Atlantic slave trade anyways, the chattel slavery that made up the early colonial and early American life, and South America. The people that woke up to it, who grew up in it, because you have to understand, the founding fathers that had slaves grew up in a time where that was normal. And we have now learned in our lives that you grow up in an abusive household, in a racist household. Children grow into people, based on the beliefs that they, have been fed till they were 6 years old and reinforced all through their lives. And we now know that person's place, their psychology, their beliefs are born out of that. And so some illusion that I would never do that. I would have, if I was then, I would have done something different is silly and either way. The point is that when someone changes, when someone goes from the side they're on that you don't like and you disagree with and you hate and whatever, and they do come to their senses and they do recognize the wrongfulness of their ways and the crimes they may have committed, and either in a whether it's a soft transition or a hard landing, they make that change. You don't. Your activism, your anger, your voice can facilitate that, but the change comes inside them. And with that, you have to recognize, how do the changes you make in your life happen? How have you changed your mind at certain times? Was it because you were being yelled at? Was because the person that was expressing the alternate viewpoint that you eventually came around to was berating you with it, or was making you feel ashamed? Maybe that's where you start, faking it till you made it, perhaps. But ultimately, if you came around, you genuinely changed anything about yourself, it's because you saw an example of someone being bigger than you. Does that make sense? That's what it's been in my life. All the changes I've made in my life that have genuinely taken hold is because I saw someone who was more ethical, stronger, more resilient, more forgiving, more understanding, with more information, education, philosophical depth than I had. And I resonated with that. And I saw the lacking in myself about that. And I sought, in some ways, the joy and the ease that person had in not carrying the burden of either carrying around, this baggage of hate or whatever it was. And I've never really carried any kind of deep-seated hatred. The examples are much smaller. But insofar as like just reforming your own life and maturing, going, I was being dumb and I don't want to be dumb anymore, which is, I think, what most of us do when we're trying to, step forward in our lives and be a better version of ourselves. We look for people that we can resonate to. It's always been their example. It has never been, their denigration. And even the most inspiring speeches, like there's tons all over YouTube, there are these inspiration speeches. And even the most like harsh ones about, you got to stand up and not be a loser and blah, blah, blah. And there's that Rocky speech from, Rocky Balboa that people have made like one note piano montage videos about to get people to start working out and eating better, blah, blah, blah. And even that one is a father talking to his son. And while he challenges him on a part of his personality that is really bad, it's dragging him down. He does it from a point of view of, I see the greatness in you. And the reason I see the greatness in you is because I had to drag myself up too. And if you can, it would be beautiful, I think, if in the ways that we try to motivate people towards the light, towards being better people, always with it is a certain couched understanding that we're all on a road of improvement ourselves, always. And a recognition of what genuinely makes us improve. Because in tribalism and separation and segregation, in the way that we stiff arm those who are different than us, one of the ways we fail is that we attribute a change matrix internally to them that is different from ours. We think something makes them different that's not the way I change. How they'll come to their changes is utterly I can't even understand it. It's an undefined, bizarre, inhuman in many ways, personal growth arc that they're on. And if and you have to, and like I said, this is really about what that Mlk speech means to me when I hear it every year, all the way through. And it's why I wanted to play it all the way through at the beginning of this. Is if someone then whose life was taken like it was, and there's much talk about how he was sort of accepting that might be the end he comes to because of how dangerous it was to even speak those words at that time. If he can stand in front of all those people and say from his heart, I can see a day. I want to see a day. I dream of a day, and I do think it's possible, where the children and grandchildren of slaves and slaveholders can have a meal across from each other and share stories. And because, this is also back in a time where families ate together. There were no social media devices. Most people didn't even have a television set. So when you sat down for dinner, the family conversations were the entertainment. And so family dinners back then had even a gigantic cultural meaning that is also because of the padding of history. We're distanced from that. And so these references may not land the way they should, but sitting and eating together, sharing a meal across the table, and laughing and telling stories about what happened during your day, which was in many ways the reference he's making. And the much more innocent view of, for example, Thanksgiving that they had at that time, without the sort of, nihilistic narcissism of, well, it was all a lie, and so therefore it must stay a lie. The fact that he could imagine that is exemplary of a strength and a beauty of character that is that resonating tuning fork we should all aspire to. And so therefore, in that aspiration, one of the ways that I have come to recognize how positive change happens, where I move away from something that I was either doing or saying or believing that wasn't great towards something that was better. If someone attacked that thing, spitting mad, if someone attacked that thing, the impulse for most people, even if they're not 100% on board, and this shows up in sort of nationalistic reactions after a country's attack, Pearl Harbor, 9/11, those kind of things. If it's attacked harshly, the natural reaction for most humans is to band together behind that thing to stop the attack in an act of like tourniqueting the incivility and going, okay, if this is war, this is war. If you want to talk about it, let's talk about it. But once the attack happens, we're all going to kind of join together behind it. Whereas ridicule and the recognition of absurdity, our dear friend comedy, is the alternative in that circumstance. That saying that's ridiculous and laughing at it causes like a drop of oil in water to cause everything to separate out. Instead of clinging together, that recognition that this is absurd and below you, because that's what ridiculous means. What are we saying when we say something is ridiculous or hilarious or funny when someone does it as a behavior? That it's below the person that's doing it, and it's below the rest of us. That's why it's funny. And it is something we all need to avoid. And so, through ridicule and silliness and the sort of retraction of venom from the conversation, I feel we do way more good. And this is why, when my dear friends, again, will clamor about the dangers around the Steve Bannons, the Donald Trumps, and the Mike Pillows of the world, my response is to mock and laugh at them. Because A, I don't believe you. I don't believe that humans are that easily hurted. And I will not speak ill of the population of humans that way. It's usually when they glom together in these kind of responses, it's way more complicated. And if you could get in there, there's a lot of weak points in a they always talk about the weakest link in a chain. The more complex a chain is, the more weak links there are. But if there's an illusion that it's not a chain at all, it's just a bar, and everybody's telling you, you'll not even think to attack the weak links in the chain and break it up and go, this was never a chain to begin with. These people are holding arms and they're not even sure why. So I am not going to take the threat of Steve Bannon seriously, because he's an inserious person, and I don't believe it. And I think the people who attribute more strength to the villainous among us, while it is a natural reaction that humans have used to avoid saber-toothed tigers in the past and was very functional, it has less and less use in a civil society, and it's a knee-jerk reaction, and it's not going to aid us in any way, and it's certainly not going to help build family. So I'm going to laugh at the outlandish member of the person sitting at the dining room, at the dinner table. I'm going to laugh at what they're saying and have fun at it. because that really will be the thing. You're sitting at, this is a good example. You're sitting at Thanksgiving dinner table and you have that uncomfortable person there. And if there are any maggots watching, bless your hearts. You have a freshly non-binary high schooler with double color hair who's got a Billie Eilish t-shirt on and wants these are pronouns, and they're just all of a sudden into this stuff, and it happened in a year, and the last time you saw them, blah blah blah. It's all I don't know how. But in those moments, making fun of that human being is, or being cruel to them, being mean, going, "What's wrong with you?" Da, da, da. Or at that right-wing uncle that you have that's so angry at the table. Instead of looking at the complexity of the circumstance, just going, there is a value in laughing at that absurdity. And it will build more bridges and bring more change, and at least a ceasefire or a truce, if that's all you can manage, is an enormously good thing. So you can, and by the way, you can disregard anything that I have to say. That's sort of the beauty of it. You can think that it's better to fight the fight your way. Most of the people that I know who are, in the activist class that I've worked with, both in, across a myriad of issues, from HRC and GLAAD to the Humane Society to all the AIDS walks I've been on, most of the folks that think that this struggle is not only a fight, it's a war, also don't feel like any progress is being made. Can't see it when it is. Because written into the code of believing that it's a war is that someone has to win. And win means we live, they die on some level. They gotta be wiped out. Because that's what wars are about. They have to surrender to me or be wiped out. And if you believe that that's the exchange that's going on, you're never going to see any progress, because there isn't any until they surrender or die. Because it's a war. And because that's the inspiration I took from MLK and that speech, that everybody just quotes and memes left and right, but doesn't listen to the whole thing and doesn't recognize the work of him just saying those words to that gigantic crowd at that time, that to honor and respect that means, changing your mentality away from it being a war. Now, it's not a game, it's not flippant, it's important. But you fight wars one way and you solve challenges the other. And if you think every answer to the challenges that pose themselves are from a war footing, I mean, you're a hammer looking for nails. And that's, to me, That's not what that speech was about. It was bigger than that. It was bigger than us. It was bigger than people wanted to be at the time. It's bigger than some people want to be today. But it is absolutely, I mean, I'm maybe there's somebody in the chat right now that thinks that shouldn't be the goal. Maybe you think segregation is, maybe there's somebody in the chat that thinks segregation is the answer. I doubt it. So anyways, that's, you use the tools you have. And maybe because I was, raised in a house, that we laughed away our problems. We had to. My, just so you know where I come from. Let's see. Let's see if I can bring something up to show you guys. Yeah, here you go. When I was 8 years old, there was a big flood in Kentucky, and hold on. Oh, I'm on transition. Here you go. This guy right here, and it just rolled through and wiped out big chunks of Frankfurt, and Peaks Mill, where I lived, was really flooded. I was 8 years old, and the house we lived in, we used wood burning. We used a pot-bellied wood burning stove. Well, it was a square, but it was a rectangle iron stove for heat. So we didn't have AC throughout the house. The main room in the house was a log cabin room, and every winter, we would bring this giant thing out of it, like from the corner, put it in the center of the room, hook a tin pipe up to a hole in the chimney, and it would sit on it. My dad went to a junk quarry and found a piece of marble, and he cut a rectangle out of it to put it on the floor, because the years of the stove being sitting in the floor and getting as hot as it got was burning 4 holes in the floor. It had 4 legs. So it had to. So in 1978, when this flood happened, this was in December. It was cold, and all the wood was wet. And there was none to be had. There was, if you couldn't. We had to go out in a little canoe and climb up in a tree and saw a few big limbs off of a tree that was up on the main road that hadn't been hit by this up the hill, and then cut it up and bring it back to the house and burn it in the wood burning stove, because all the stockpiled and split wood was gone. And it just stayed that way for a while. Now, our house itself did not flood because it was almost like the people who built the log cabin in the early 1800s that the house was built around had been through something like this before, and they just built the dirt up under the house about 2 feet. And it was just enough because we had a dry creek next to the house to siphon off water from where that it would have put the where it would have flooded the house. It was pulled enough water away because it was dry most of the time. And this was. We also had the big tornado of Louisville. So we were there during that, 1978. Then we were in, let me see if I can find this for you. Well, this was before. Yeah, 1974. Yeah. Let's see if I can. So we were there during this part. Let's see. Oh, I see. Hold on 1 second. We lived in Louisville. I was 4 years old. And we were, there you go. And it just, here it is. April 3rd, 1974. So we lived in Louisville at this point. And it was just friggin' brutal. And then we moved to Frankfort, out into Peaks Mill, which is right over in this area, back this way. And 4 years later, this happened. And the interesting thing about it was that it's where I first sort of recognized that we had neighbors that hated each other. And in both places, but I was probably more aware of it in Frankfort because I was older, because I had kids I would play with. My next door neighbor was about a half a mile away. And then the rest of our friends that weren't in town, which was a 45-minute drive, into Frankfort proper. By the way, for the record, see where this Christmas thing is right there? See that? There's a banner with my face on it there right now. Just saying. It's kind of nice. And mainly because it upsets some of my old teachers. You're never gonna... Oh, shit. What I noticed, though, more than anything, was that the minute this happened, nobody gave a shit anymore. Nobody cared that they had people. I remember I saw a neighbor of mine. When the flood came down through there was a house there's this split road. Some people have seen my stand-up bit about my mom being the only natural enemy of the rural deer, because my mom hit 8 deer over the years as we lived in Kentucky, and 2 pigs, and another story. But in there was a Rocky Branch Road, Route 7, which is the road that went by our house. And our driveway was this old connection to the old Rocky Branch. And I tell the story about the school bus and blah blah blah. If you ever want to watch it, it's on Alcatraz and whatever. So, it's all true stories. And before we get to Peaks Mill Elementary, about 800 yards from where my assistant scoutmaster almost sliced his leg off, and I had to tourniquet his leg when I was 9 years old, and wait almost 45 minutes for a vehicle to show up to take him into town because ambulance. Hilarious. And the road splits down, and there was another break off of the river, and for whatever reason it caught a bunch of that water. And there was a family that lived, and I'm not going to name any names for families just because some of them still live there, and it would be rude, but there was a family down there that was just kind of a pain in the ass. They were not liked or appreciated by the folks that went to church, by the folks that didn't go to church, by the people who liked to fish and the people who didn't like to fish, by the hunters and non-hunters. For whatever reason, they were just, ne'er-do-wells. The dad, I think, was a bit of a drunkard, and when he got drunk, was a bit of an asshole. And my neighbor, my best friend growing up, his dad said, get in the boat. He had a little dinghy with an outboard on it that they had for the creek, that they would only use down creek because it was thicker, and it was he could lift the engine so they could go over the shallow parts, and that's why he still had it. Otherwise, it's all canoes because it's too shallow in places. And he was like, get in the boat. It was me and my best friend. And my dad at that point was trapped in the city because of the water. So he had to wait to come out. It was just me, my sister, and and our neighbors. And so we all got in the boat. And where did we go? We went to this asshole's house because it was underwater. And they were on the roof. And I remember very distinctly being in this boat and them coming off, trying to get, it was the guy and his wife and their older daughter were out there. And we got the daughter and the mom, and they got in the boat, and it was all rickety and shaky. We were right up to the roof or whatever. And and this is moving water. It was crazy. And we're just kind of guiding them into the boat, and we go back over to where the ground was level, and and they got out on the road, which was above the water. And then we went back for the dad, and he, as he's getting out there, he's a little teetery, and he falls into the water, and he's not going to get swept away or anything. The water's probably 8 feet deep at that point, but we, if he started floating, we could outrun him, caught him, whatever. It wasn't that he was going to die, and we saved his life in that moment. In many ways, it was just how my neighbor, my best friend's dad, who's a bit of an asshole himself, and this guy who was a total prick, and nobody liked him. The way he reached into the water to get this guy when he fell, and the sort of desperate kind of oh, don't let him go. All the bullshit, all the crap between the two of them was just gone. Any argument they would have had, any differences of opinion they have about stuff, you could see it in his face. I can't let this guy come to harm. Not for crying, just because I can't talk when I'm crying. But that was revealing to me. That was in my 8-year-old life. A lesson. And I'm sure there's a stack of reasons why I went to acting and comedy and all that stuff. You know. But I'm sure that fed into it a little bit. Just the recognition that we're bigger than whatever differences we dream up or have been poured into us since we were kids. That life is bigger than that. And we owe it to life to remind people of that. Because, but for the rarest human beings, most people, I truly believe, in those moments, would have grabbed that guy the same way and did what they could. Because that reflex was bigger than the deeply entrenched personalities of both of those men. And neither of them intended to teach me that lesson that day. Neither of them maybe even knew. And if they had spoke it to me at some point, it wouldn't have landed the way it sort of gripped my soul in that circumstance. Now, I've seen in my life since that a bunch of those moments. I've been involved in those moments. And in answer to your question, afterwards, did they go back to being jerks? Not like they were. Because it was those men, those people in that situation were now, they always say no one steps in the same flooded river twice. They are now those men with that added experience. Neither forgot it. Did it make them perfect people? Did it suddenly make them pillars of the community or something? No. But it made them better. Made me better. And that's what matters. Because we often talk about, letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. There are some moments in life, some circumstances where it's just too big for that to happen. That so much good happens in that situation that you can't bypass it. You can't overlook it. You can't ruin it. So gigantic. So I move around in life with that as much as I can. And in knowing that I have experienced something like that, and you know, never mind the fact that, perfection is a road, not a destination. You can be perfectly on your way. There is no getting there, though. And if there is, or if there could be, someone would have hit it a long time ago. And we'd all just race towards that. Oh, finally. A life without, internal disintegration, sin, worry, and fretting and anxiety, and even dreaming of that is sort of rude to the people who are on their way. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is I like you guys, and I think you're going to be okay. And even if you lose faith in your fellow humans, I will most of the time think that that's just the areas where you have lost faith in yourself. Because if you can't believe someone else would change, it's usually rooted in the idea that I could never change. And anyone can. For better or worse. So the gentle correction and the constant guiding and the understanding that there is no end to this journey, there is just a constant road of improvement. Thank you, Sasha. I needed that. Is, to me anyways, and I'm not telling anybody how to do stuff, maybe a little why now and again, but not how. That in the this is what this day resonates for me. This is what it gives off. This is the tuning fork that it brings me back to, and how it ties to my life. And the very fact that it makes me more aware of me being decent, cordial, and polite, even in public, to people, because I do not know where they've come from and where they are going. That rude person in line that's upset and making a big scene may have just gotten a cancer diagnosis, and all of a sudden they're acutely aware that every wasted moment they've ever had would be like gold in their hand if they had it back, and they still haven't processed where they are. Or that they're just a jerk and they're mean, but by reacting with sympathy and laughter, I lighten the day of 10 other people, because we all share that this is not a big deal, and let this person make us equally as angry and tight and small. These people, right? If I can take those unwarranted victories away from the truly villainous among us, that's what I'm going to do. And the way I'm going to do it is by refusing to take them seriously. Until, quite frankly, it's my responsibility on an interpersonal level, in a sincere and once-in-a-lifetime moment, to do something about it. If someone attacks me with a butcher knife, I'm not going to laugh it off. You know what I mean? But I'm also not going to pretend that everybody who shoots me a glance and doesn't like my haircut is attacking me with a butcher knife. Because talk about way to like weighing yourself into, wading into a stupid river just to drown yourself. Thank you, Hal Vickery. Thanks, man. You're the Tony Stark of my Peter Parker. That's hilarious. So, yeah, and I also I know I upset people when I talk about this. I know people all over the place get all kinds of angry when I tell you that the world is going to keep on spinning. It's not going to end. It's going to transition through stuff. It's going to have ebb and flow. It's going to have scary moments and vigorous, vibrant moments, but it's going to keep rolling right along. You are not going to be alive when this all comes to a close. So put your shoulder to the wheel and try to make your life and everyone else's a little bit better, even if it's just by tossing some smiles. And I will be here being your court jester. Do you know the real story of court jesters? I've told it a couple times back in the day, but we have a lot of new people gathering in the morning shows. By the way, like and subscribe. I haven't done any of that stuff. Give a thumbs up if it suits you. Thanks for being here. It used to be believed that the court jester, the job was to entertain the court and the king, and they would just, just a clown that would constantly, just make the king laugh, and that it was just kind of like they just had a comedian on retainer, stand-up philosopher, a bullshit artist, that the court jester actually had a very, very important job. They kept the king from killing all the smart people. So every kingdom had a guy in charge of sort of the aqueducts and in charge of buildings and in charge of the farms and stuff. So they have little ministers, right, who are in charge of all these different things, trade and all this stuff. And these were the people with genuine brains. These were the people who knew shit, as much as you could know back then. They were, as much as you could know about medicine back then, they knew about it. As much as you could know about agriculture back then, they knew it. And they were necessary to keep the entire society running. Because without them, it truly fell apart. The king, on the other hand, or the queen in some cases, was usually an inbred lunatic from a family that believed that God put them in charge. And when you grow up that way, your ego tends to be a little outsized. And so one of the areas where they would sometimes get angry and paranoid is if somebody got a little too big for their britches or a little too smart, they might try to take over. This guy thinks he knows every goddamn thing, right? And they would start saying things like, I know better than the generals, I know better than the thing. The king would say this thing. But if he didn't start believing it, he'd get a little nervous and off with their heads. And the problem was, if you did that, you killed the only people who knew how to keep the crops growing and the roads clear. The whole place would be fucked. And then at that time, it didn't take much, and another kingdom would go, oh, they killed their minister of defense. Shall we take them over? Why not? And so the jester would come in and take the piss out of everybody in the court except the king. He'd come in there in front of the king, make him laugh, and basically, take everybody down a notch in terms of, their egotistical ranking in the room. And all of the court knew this. they didn't really take it personally because they knew if this guy didn't come in and make a joke about them, they were like, this motherfucker's going to kill me because he thinks, I'm too necessary to make a joke of or too above being joked about. And the king's like, why not? What are you doing? Why aren't you saying something about him? Your life was in danger if somebody didn't make a joke about you. Now, in modern America, we are the kings. The people are. And over time, we cultivated an army of armchair kings who sit in their puffy lazy boy thrones with their scepter remote control going off with his head, off with his head, off with his head. And when it comes to TV shows, who gives a shit? But when it comes to news, off with his head is a problem if you're killing the messenger with your remote control in that regard. So comedians temper the news to different crowds so that they'll be able to listen to it without just shutting it off entirely. And so we still serve that purpose just for a different court. And that's why nothing is out of the bounds of comedy. Comedy is about humanity, and all things are up for grabs. And the way you decide if something's good or not is it's funny or not to you. Speaking of which, I'll be at Cobb's Comedy Club this Friday and Saturday. One show Friday night, 2 shows Saturday. I'll be doing the radio show from there. It's going to be a crazy week, by the way, for the regular stream. I should be able to do most of the shows. Wednesday, I have a photo shoot, and it's somebody else arranged it starting in the afternoon, so it probably will eat into our regular time. So Wednesday, I might do a late night stream, or I might just not have one. So I'll have a morning one for sure, but not the afternoon one, possibly on Wednesday. Just heads up. And I'll make it up with an extra long one on Thursday or something. And then Thursday night, I leave and go to San Francisco, so I'll do the morning show and the afternoon show on Friday in San Francisco, which will be lovely. Hopefully, I'll be able to take my phone on a little stand and use and broadcast from that, and then read the chat on my iPad and just be able to go out someplace cool in San Francisco. Obviously, it'll be inside because San Francisco is always streaming. Is always freezing when I'm trying to do stuff outside, and it's windy, so you're like, and to all of our nor'easter brothers and sisters who are in the cold and the snow right now, congratulations. I'm sorry, and I'm jealous. My girlfriend isn't. She hates the cold. I happen to love it. That'll be the breaking point when we're in our 60s and we live in separate houses, because she's like, nah, I'm not leaving the beach. And I'm like, but I want to make snowballs. It's just, yeah. But Neil deGrasse Tyson for president. And no. Thanks, Elizabeth. I try. So, anyways, yes, I'm very jelly about that. Yeah, if you have electricity, yes. I mean, these are crucial parts of it. I think in let's see, Walden Pond, Thoreau write about how it was, winter is the loveliest time, and and living out in nature was great. All of which he wrote behind on the warm side of a bay window, as my dear friend Rob Fiedler used to say. My girlfriend's right. Well, I'm fine. You guys can go snorkeling. I don't mind that. I'm obviously going to be on the Monsters of Rock cruise in a few weeks. I'm looking forward to it, and she's going with me. But yeah, I'm glad. take it easy out there. Yes. If we have wood stove, we lose power. Oh, that's good. It's an important story to tell. So, thanks for, I'm going to tip out a little early today. I have a feeling this afternoon show might be a little long. And this one's quite frankly been in emotional work, and it's also a holiday. So go have fun and contemplate anything that I've said in terms of what you believe is worthwhile. Incorporate the best of it and whatever you feel is good into your philosophy and psyche, and excrete the rest. I am only here for the nutritionally viable aspects of what I say to be absorbed. The rest, I mean, honestly, just do your worst. All right. So it is for us, Astro B London. It's MLK Day here in the States. So, much love to you guys. Oh, I almost forgot. I'm making my little fart sound. I gotta ease out some music. I gotta put it on in the mornings. It's nice. It's good. Glad we got to share this, you guys. And by the way, when I get teary-eyed, and it happens with regular cards, when we're talking about serious stuff, there is no artist. It's a free loop. I don't know. Just enjoy it. Yes. That when I get a little misty, and if I ever apologize for it, believe me, I'm not apologizing for crying or tearing up. Ever. Don't ever think that for a second. The only thing I have is that I'm in the middle of talking, and people's time is value. I'd rather get to the point. But it isn't about shame ever. I didn't grow up in the fucking late 50s. My whole generation is fine with crying. I'm in love. Beautiful. Did I get something? I got a package. That's fun. What could it possibly be? Do I dare share it? Is to be honest, is something what'd I get? Oh, it's our filter. I have to check. By the way, these are my chores today. I get to change the water filter and the air filter in our refrigerator. So that's thanks, babe, for bringing my honeydew list right to me. Yes, before she leaves the house. P.S. Don't forget this. All right. So I have to go do some chores. Today is a day to recognize progress. And today is a day to continue to dream of a time when the people who are against progress are ashamed by their embarrassed, I would say is better, embarrassed by their lack of numbers and how no one is taking them seriously. Because most of the people who are against, the equality of sexes and races right now, who are actively, entrenched in it, are hilarious to me, like Blazing Saddles characters. They're a caricature of humanity, and I'm not going to take them seriously. I'm not going to. Let other people wrench their garments and scream at the sky, how could these people be among us? And I will be over here going, there's 7.6 billion people on the earth. There's a bunch of every kind of asshole out there, and I'm not worried about it. Because the vast majority of people are pretty cool. And thank you for being in that crowd, sticking around with me. Much love. See you later. do, Mark. Bye.